I'm Marcy Markusa. This is Manitoba, your podcast digging into the news and the important issues that are making news in our province, in our home. I want to start actually today's podcast with this. Since End Homelessness Winnipeg was established 10 years ago in 2015, we have been through 5 different premiers. But here we are today in 2025, and we're talking about a strategy to end homelessness in Manitoba. This one's called Your Way Home, and it was just announced. And that is today's podcast. So what is included in this? This was announced by the current NDP government. The goal is to dismantle encampments one by one. In 2015 in Winnipeg, we didn't have a lot of encampments. Now, we certainly do. We've seen our issues with homelessness and the problems with the people experiencing homelessness and not finding supports just escalating and growing, especially in our community and in Winnipeg since COVID, in the last 5 years especially. So there's a number of different encampments. So the plan is to start with this, dismantle those encampments and start moving people directly into housing. Housing that the province says is being built and will continue to be built. So this is a big strategy. The province is in the process of purchasing and renovating apartment buildings right now. They say it will add 300 new social units with support services. So those wraparound services are a big part of what is in this plan. CPC's Jim Agapito and Jason Empson started not by talking to experts, not by talking to people that were part of developing this plan, but by talking to people who are experiencing homelessness about what they think of the plan.
Jesse Wimberg.
What would it take for you to try and find, to want to leave an encampment or some shelter? What would you need?
I guess more supports on my behalf. So to get, motivation, and try to get into a stable environment, so away from drugs.
Is there enough social programs or whatnot helping you to do that currently right now?
No, because there's no funding in it, in the programs that we need to have those requirements.
Do you feel safe being out on the streets right now?
Well, yeah and no, because it's cold, because you freeze to death, right? Because it's minus 40 out. But yeah, it's safe on the streets in certain areas. I would say certain types, I guess, because gangs, right? Certain gangs in different areas. Yeah, I think it's safe.
How about in encampments? Is it safe at encampments?
I think it's okay at encampments. They don't really do much on there. They're mostly there trying to survive, right? If there was more buildings available for rent and all that, and if they had more apartments for the homeless, it would be a lot easier on the cops and all that, for the crime rate and stuff like that, yeah.
Catherine Smith-Sutherland.
Where are you currently living right now, Catherine?
I'm homeless. I've been homeless for 3 to 4 years, about 4th year. Yeah.
Have you ever lived in any encampments and whatnot?
Yeah, I used to live at the waterfront. I used to live up in Chief Peguis, and I used to live at St. Anne's and Fermor.
Days are really cold, how do you stay warm?
Well, this year I've been staying in the shelters. I just go back and forth to shelters sometimes.
Where do you feel most safe? Is it on at the shelters and on the streets being by yourself? Well, where is it?
I usually camping by myself just because, it's just kind of hard with a lot of people living in a place at once. It takes a while to get used to because I've usually had a place of my own. I got homeless because I lost my job. I'm actually a level 2 electrician, and I lost my job, and then I couldn't pay for rent, so I lost my apartment, and so it got me here. So,
for people who don't know what it's like to be living on the streets, being homeless right now in the cold, what would you say to them?
That I have no idea because it's their choice, right? If they want to live like this, it's really hard though. Well, it's been hard for me for 3-4 years. Because I haven't been on welfare, but I got on welfare. But I've been just binning to get my money for stuff like weed and smokes and stuff like that. I would really like some housing, but for the time being, I'll just stick on the streets because I just walk around and kill time, but I don't have the inhibition to seek for houses and stuff.
Can I ask why that is?
It just takes too much time out of my day. Like, I feel like I have to do other things than look for a house. It's not on my top priority list because I got other places I could go for right now, right? But, yeah.
Where are some of the places that you could go then to find shelter, especially during this time?
Siloam Mission, 190, and Main Street Projects, the homeless shelters I go to.
CBC's Jim Agapito out yesterday talking to some people who are experiencing homelessness in Winnipeg. So the province has said the encampments will only be decommissioned once move-in ready housing is secured for every person. And they also have said by 2031 they hope to end chronic homelessness altogether. Tessa Blaikie-Whitecloud is CEO of Siloam Mission, but not for long. She was just hired by the province to be the new Premier's senior advisor on ending chronic homelessness. She's been listening and she's in studio this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
A big task. Obviously, you were listening to some of these stories. You've heard them in your role at Siloam and also, in other places over the years. Mm-hmm. What stood out from you from that we just heard from people that will match up with the plan that you feel, you'll be meeting needs?
Yeah, so two pieces that I want to point out. So the first is that first individual talks about the housing has to have the right supports. The housing has to be the right kind of environment. It has to be funded adequately. It has to be a solution that actually works for him to pursue that housing, and that there is that need for more units. And this plan commits to 300 units specifically to address encampments, but also is on top of a $116 million investment in social housing. So we're not talking about just 300 units and we think that's going to solve homelessness. We're talking about a holistic all-of-government approach. And then secondly, when we're talking with that woman, I think one of the things that's really important in what she's saying is that right now it does take a lot of time to look for housing because there isn't any. And so you're looking for a needle in a haystack. Yesterday at the press conference, I mentioned that, every month we have about 100 units that are deeply affordable come available in our city. And we have about 3,500 people competing for those units. So honestly, why bother? Like, I get where she's coming from. And so part of the work here is that these 300 units are going to be dedicated to supporting folks who are living unsheltered, while we're simultaneously still making that investment to create more social housing units in general.
I have to key in right away on some of the things that to me look like they could be some of the challenges with the plan, because it involves a lot of moving. So you've got to go in and talk to people who are in encampments and you're moving them somewhere else. So that's the individual human thing. But then you're moving people out of Manitoba housing units right now as well as part of the plan to free up room there. People who would be, eligible and maybe supported and would be deemed to be able to find success moving on to a different rental situation in Manitoba. But how do you even begin to approach that? Because you're basically coming in saying, I know you've lived here, but we're going to try to help you to move somewhere else.
Yeah, so I think it's a two-part question, right? And yesterday was really a three-part announcement. So one of that pieces of the announcement was the encampment response strategy, which says, we're going to work with outreach teams that already have relationships with encampments to say, we're bringing 300 units online, 40 of them are already ready, dedicated to looking at this particular population. Outreach teams, who do you know that's keen and ready for housing, and how do we work on an encampment to encampment approach in that respect?
So that's some of the first steps.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Right. It's and I think, it's working with the sector. It's working with people who have the relationships of outreach. So it's not, going to be a brand new person walking into an encampment and saying in 30 days, we're going to find you ID and housing. It's, hey, what do those relationships look like? And I think that's what the government knew in wanting to launch this plan, is that we needed somebody from the sector to help collaborate with the sector so that there is that clear channel between government and the sector. And moving forward, I'll be able to be that channel to say, okay, here's the housing units that we're bringing online. We've been crying for housing units. 300 are coming right now. There's also that giant investment in social housing. What does it look like to start moving folks from encampments? Who's ready? What supports do they need? What do the supports need to look like?
Just before we move to part B, which is moving the people out of Manitoba housing to free up those units, what do you do on the ground when somebody says, I don't want to move? You and I have had conversation before about some people are choosing to live in encampments for various reasons. Mm-hmm. And now it's not only that they're going to be helped to move, but also those encampments are going to be decommissioned, right? So how do you handle that challenge?
So I think a big piece of it is that in the past, we haven't had the housing to offer people, number one, right? So the idea of going to an encampment and saying, hey, y'all need to get into some housing, let's work on that together, has sort of been a pipe dream. But this plan starts with housing. And not only does it start with housing, but it starts with what does the housing, the same question actually that your reporter asked, what would it need to look like for you to move into housing? Well, that housing would have to be supportive. That housing would have to help me with my addiction. That housing would have to, all of those things. So it's working on what does the housing need to look like to become the most attractive option? And then how do we work on, as we bring more and more units online, 300 is that initial, the commitment made, yesterday. How do we make sure that those units are going to meet the needs of folks in encampments so that it is something that they want to take on?
What encampment will you start with? Because the first one will be approached in February.
So we haven't sat down with outreach teams yet to talk through what makes the most sense. And also the work that is being, so as I mentioned, there's 40 units ready, but a lot of the other units are coming online with nonprofit partners. So there's going to be 2LGBTQ specific housing. There's going to be Indigenous women specific housing. There's going to be a variety of housing. And so we're going to need to, as those units come online, again, work with the sector, work with outreach partners and say, okay, who fits where? Who's going to find that attractive? So I don't know that yet.
Okay, so if you're doing that work, I know I'm quoting from the strategy. It says, we also want to work with Manitoba Housing to identify tenants best positioned to succeed outside of that, connect them with rent supports and subsidies to move on to the next level. That's what I was referring to free up those spaces. Is that also you doing that work or connection? How are those folks being identified?
Yeah, and so I think that's going to be working with Manitoba Housing to say, who's got a solid rental history, who's been really stable. Manitoba Housing is rent geared to income, so people's income, can fluctuate. And then we can figure out, who's kind of already ready maybe to move on. It will be about making sure that those rent subsidies are there. It will be about making sure that there is support so that if something does fall apart in the first little while, there's a way to make sure that doesn't lead to homelessness for somebody. But there's a lot of drive, right? Like there's a lot of people across sectors. And so including the private rental market, larger companies who are like, we want to be a part of the solution too. And so there are maybe a whole bunch of their units in their portfolio that they're willing to give up to a strategy like this to make sure that we can do the right thing by our neighbors in Winnipeg who are currently experiencing life on the street.
What's the plan if someone refuses support or doesn't want to be moved, either from an encampment or from their apartment?
Yeah, so this is a person-centered approach, right? We're going to lead with compassion. So the first question there is, okay, why? What does that look like? What's happened? How do we work through that in a way that makes sense for you? How do we work through that in a way that makes sense for the broader strategy? So it is still going to be person-centered. And a key part of that is that flex funding that was also announced. So like I've watched flex funding change lives. I've been a huge advocate for flex funding for a long time. We've never had it until this government.
What does it mean? Because listeners might not know what that means.
Totally. It means that like somebody shows up today trying to access shelter and we say, okay, well, what happened? How did your housing fall apart? Well, like my car broke down and I couldn't get it fixed, so I couldn't get to my job. Okay. Would your employer take you back if your car was fixed? Yes. Okay. Would your landlord take you back if we paid your arrears? Oh, okay. All of a sudden you're not experiencing homelessness, right?
So you have flexibility to use the funding in a very targeted way.
Yeah, and based on what that individual is presenting with. So, another story of flex funding, we had somebody who, in an experience of psychosis because of a med challenge that they experienced, hitchhiked from across the country and ended up in Winnipeg. But they had a psychiatrist and supportive housing in their city of origin. And so we contacted the psychiatrist, we contacted the supportive housing. We said, is this true? Are you ready to receive this individual? Absolutely, yes, please. Right?
Is the plan overly ambitious? I'm being careful with my language here because it's this is welcomed by many. But is it overly ambitious when it comes to the wraparound supports that we'll be able to offer people given the challenges we already have with things like mental health and addiction supports right now?
Yeah, so this is wraparound services that are in the housing, right? And so on top of that, there's going to be that investment. We already know 100 more mental health workers coming online. So this particular investment is about wraparound supports in those units. And I can tell you from the outside a little bit, putting back my Siloam hat back on for a moment, we're one of the people, one of the organizations that's going to be creating this. And we got our full ask on what we felt those supports needed to look like. So the government is saying, okay, what does it need to look like to house people well? And now it's about building up the team and building up the capacity to take that on.
24/7 supports, it says in the plan. I know that from some of our reporting, the numbers that are needed for this, I mean, for one person to have wraparound support, in one of our reporting, it said the number was $50,000, and I think it was 2 support workers per one person, and that may be off. But are you confident that this system will be able to come up to capacity that quickly to properly support people?
So again, I think what's interesting is that this is a 30-day by encampment plan. This isn't 30 days for all encampments. Right? So the realism is built into the plan. We're going to work with folks in encampments. We're going to work with outreach providers who already have the relationships to understand who's ready as we bring units online. Those units are going to be tailored to specific populations and led by nonprofits that are already working with those community members to say, okay, what does that need to look like? And then we're going to move on to the next one. So it's going to be a slow build. We're not saying that this plan is going to solve anything overnight. It took us a long time to get here. Almost my entire life, we have been divesting from social housing as a nation, and we have been divesting from social housing as a province, unfortunately, for the last 7.5 years. So it's going to be a long-term solution.
I have to ask as a last question, Tessa. People might wonder where End Homelessness Winnipeg is in all of this, because we've had multiple plans from that group over the years. They've been the overarching face of the organization tasked with ending it, distributing funds to Ottawa's Reaching Home strategy. How do they fit into the government's plan? I saw no mention of them. Yeah,
so it'll be really important that they continue to do the work that they're doing, administering Reaching Home funds, and being supporting coordinated access and all of that. I really look forward to, Jason and I have spoken at least twice already this week. He's the CEO there. So really look forward to collaborating with End Homelessness Winnipeg to ensure that as the provincial government says, we want to step up and take a more coordinated approach, specifically on encampments. So the coordinated access system is the first time you enter into that system, you're prioritized based on your level of need. And that system will continue. And so that will support folks that are currently in shelters, that have a caseworker.
So this plan doesn't necessarily replace everything we've heard about the plans that have already been in place.
No, this is a plan. So there's 2 pieces to the plan, right? There's the long-term vision to end homelessness in our province, and this short-term piece that says we want to deal with folks that are living unsheltered now. They deserve our help now.
That is my conversation with Tessa Blaikie-Whitecloud. She's the CEO of Siloam Mission, but the newly announced now advisor to Premier Wab Kinew, the senior advisor on ending chronic homelessness, speaking to us about this big new strategy. This is Manitoba for this edition of our podcast. I'm Marcy Markusa. Don't forget to like and share.